r/ask Reddit. CPS workers of Reddit. What was the worst case you have seen? Firstly, not as harrowing as some of the other tales here. Secondly, not CPS. My girlfriend works in a school and is well read in child development and works closely with social services etc. for child welfare. She told me the story of one young boy whose father was abusive to him and mum. Mum was a junkie and suspected prostitute. Little boy is often picked up from school by grandma but lives with mum. Several things escalate and my girlfriend learns that the little boy was taken from his mum as she has resumed on-off relationship with abusive father and has been placed in foster care temporarily. In an attempt to put a positive spin on things and maintain a sense of normality, she asked the little boy what his new bedroom was like. It's warm. At my mum's eye was always cold. Late to contribute but thought I would add. I am a neurosurgeon, not a CPS worker. The case was infantile rape. The true disgust however is when you consider the mechanics that result in the degree of injury. A child is flexible but weak. In the effort to rape her, both hips were grossly dislocated. A child's orifices are obviously too small for such penetration, so the vagina and anus were severely torn. The penis entered the rectum at least a few times, resulting in rectal tears and colonic perforation. The vagina and cervix were torn as well, and the uterus was severely damaged. The baby, to deal with crying, may have been hit against an object, resulting in multiple rib and spinal fractures, as well as a depressed skull fracture. I have been in neurosurgery for over 10 years now, and this was the only time I let out a tear and vomited violently. The infant did not survive. I did not have the heart to follow up on the perpetrator, for I feared my reaction if I were to learn he got away or if I did not agree with the punishment. As a father of a 1-month-old girl, it breaks my heart to read this. Honestly, I feel sick. I can't imagine what it would have been like to be in your shoes. I've never felt so sick in my entire life. I hope that mother ducker is dead. One of my uncles was a CPS worker for a good amount of time before he just couldn't do it anymore, and I can remember 2 cases that he brought up while at a get-together. Mom was sending her 6-8-year-old daughter over the border to Mexico on a bus, where she would be picked up by pedophiles who would keep her for a few hours before sending her back with payment. Dad was raping his 16-year-old son to the point that he had developed a defense mechanism that involved crapping on himself to keep his dad away. He ended up having to wear adult diapers after CPS took him because his defense mechanism became his go-to for whenever he felt scared. Not CPS, but juvenile justice. My favorite is a kid who came into my office and told me, "I'm sorry sir, I can't talk to you. My mom told me to never talk to white people." His parents jumped him into the gang before he hit puberty. His first run-in with the law was when his mother abandoned him as a distraction when she was being chased for shoplifting. Kind of hilarious that he was so polite and frank with you. But Jesus Christ, that poor kid. I hope he's doing better now. He went to go live with other extended family. He got revoked once, but to my knowledge, he's doing good. He picked up a welding certification while locked up with us, and he's got a career and a legal way to make money now. Before I worked as a social worker, I was direct care staff at a group home for teenage girls. One girl, B, was battling drug and alcohol addiction. She was only 13 years old at the time and had been placed with us through her treatment program. She lived about 40 minutes away from the group home, and the goal was to remove her access to her addictions while providing support. B and I had discussed her major triggers for using, and she mentioned her relationship with her mother was a major stressor. That night, I heard firsthand how bad things were. During a phone call, on speaker so we could monitor, I listened to this woman berate her daughter for no reason. I stepped in and ended the call, as B ran upstairs to her room. The mother called back and continued her rant. I handed the phone to my supervisor and went to find B. I found her in her closet, crying on the floor. She didn't want to talk, but she leaned on me and cried. I gave her some space and went back downstairs to talk to my supervisor. Within a few minutes, B had left the group home. She had no stop order. We couldn't physically stop her from leaving, and apologized as she ran off. We called the police and reported her AWOL. When I left that night, she hadn't returned. The following day, I got to the group home and was happy to see B had come back on her own. We notified her mom of her return. Mom called the town police and demanded B come home. She and the officers arrived and B refused to go. Mom tells B in front of everyone that she won't lock you in your room as long and I promise that I'll feed you this time. We were shocked but no one had any legal power to refuse B going back to this horrible situation. We were all powerless as she left back into the care of her abusive mother. B left me a poem that I still have nearly 12 years later. My heart hurts just wondering what happened to her. No one heard from her after that day. What a flying duck. The woman admitted her intent to abuse the girl in front of witnesses and no one did anything about it. According to the police, it was more of an admission of past abuse. At the time, statements like this weren't reportable. That law has since been expanded to cover things like this. Sadly, who knows how many suffered before that happened. This day still haunts me. Never worked for CPS or the like, but there's a kid I've wondered about for a long time. When I was pregnant with my first spawn, over a decade ago, there was a girl who often had appointments around the same time as me. She was always there with what I assume were her mother and grandmother, and if that girl was a day over 11 years old I'd be taken aback. She was so little and massively pregnant. She didn't even have breasts when I saw her, and she still wore bright, simple kid clothes and glittery shoes. I'll always wonder how the hell she ended up pregnant so young and how life has turned out for her thus far. I'm surprised they didn't allow her to have an abortion. Children's bodies are not meant to carry babies so young. We're increasingly living in a world where that can depend entirely on what state you live in. Some of those guys in the government don't care even about the really brutal special exceptions. If the pregnancy poses a threat to the mother's health, the government has no say in it. Back when abortion was illegal in my state, there was a 10-year-old who was pregnant from her older brother. The pregnancy was causing her health to decline rapidly and ended up in the hospital. The doctors ended up cutting out the baby to save her, resulting in the death of the infant. Parents tried to sue the doctor, but the doctor sued right back for child neglect and endangerment, and one girl was put into a new home. Not a CPS worker, but my mom was a foster parent and ran a daycare out of the home. So we've known the specifics and assisted on a number of cases. One foster case was a child that was placed with us for about a week. He was a tiny little baby and despite being in high school I work up to feed him. The mother was a teenage pregnancy who was abandoned by her parents for said pregnancy and simply didn't know how to care for a baby. CPS was really understanding and gave her classes, and then when she learned how often a baby actually needed to be fed she got her child back. She reached out to us and thanked us for everything and we got regular updates. Child is 2 now. Very happy and loved. Another case where we called CPS. A mother brought her 4 kids to our daycare. Her oldest son and 3 daughters. Oldest son was 7 and did most of the care for his younger siblings, ranging from 2 to 5 in age. Mother was pregnant, again, when she was obviously below the poverty line. Baby was born. Her kids got progressively more and more dirty to the point my mom reached out in a Facebook group for clothing donations for the kids. They'd get dropped off. She would bathe them all and dress them again. She made excuses for the mother, which she says now is her biggest regret. She just kept saying, this is her 5th child, and she is a single mom, and a new baby. It's hard. Then we had to care for the baby. Sickly. Shifting blood. After 3 days with him my mom called CPS. We were never told what happened with them, but I remember they came to pick some things up and I remember looking out our front window and seeing them in the worker's car all crying. It's hard, but you know it's better for them in the end. Your first story actually made me tear up a little bit. See, compared to all the atrocity in this thread, something actually ducking went well. My case was slightly different from what many would think can be the worst. I had a report about an incorrigible child. Pretty normal stuff. Parents tried everything but they cannot control their child and are worried about the safety of the other children. This particular case was slightly different. The child and her 2 siblings were adopted by their grandparents. The grandparents stated that the one child, let's say her name was Ellen, was threatening to hurt her sibling and actually went as far to chase him around with a knife. Ellen was a 12-year-old at the time of this report. After further investigation and services with the family, I learned the full reason for the original adoption. When Ellen was younger, about 6, with her mother, she was being sexually abused by the mother's boyfriend. When Ellen's mother found out about the abuse, she murdered the boyfriend in front of Ellen and had Ellen help her clean up the mess. Now comes the grandparents unable to figure out why Ellen is troubled now. After talking to Ellen more, she was angry at her younger sibling for being normal as he was also present for the murder but too young to remember. As our last keep up with the family, the grandparent and siblings left Ellen behind and moved to another state. Ellen is currently living with a foster family and is doing much better. Sorry if this is hard to read or follow, I am writing on mobile. I can explain more later tonight if people are interested. Ship. Do you know what happened to the mom that murdered the boyfriend? Like, I'm glad he's dead because of what he did, but that's ducked up for her to have further traumatize Ellen like that. Yeah, she is currently incarcerated for life. Ellen would switch from calling her mom or her actual name. Ellen would constantly write her letters throughout the time I worked with her. Damn. I mean, I get why she got life, but I could see myself murdering someone who was raping my kid. That's so sad, the whole situation. The horrible part is the lady who murders the child rapist gets life, but there was an actual child rapist in another thread who got less than 2 years. I understand the dilemma of the grandparents not wanting Ellen to hurt the other kids, but man, that's several blows to Ellen. First, mom's boyfriend molests her, then mom kills BF. And Ellen probably thinks it's my fault he died. Then mom goes away for life. And now even her own grandparents abandon her. Not CPS, but I worked in partnership with them. In all of these cases, CPS workers were on my side and their leadership was against them. They had far too many cases to be safe. I witnessed a physical assault on a child. It was incredibly violent, and the parent could have broken the child's neck while I was watching and moving towards them. I dialed 911 and stepped between them. I was later reprimanded for putting myself at risk. If the parent was willing to do that in front of me, what were they doing when no one could see? The state did not move them into foster care because they were too old and the oldest kid could watch out for the younger. I had an 11-year-old threaten suicide and refused a safety contract. We called crisis intervention. They did not come out because if she didn't safety contract, there wasn't a bed within 8 hours or so that could take her. And if they came out, they were responsible for her. I stayed with the client for, I think, about 14 hours. I had a buyer father return to the home after prison time for raping his daughter. They had the girls follow extensive safety procedures instead of tell the parents he couldn't return. There was likely a return to the sexual abuse. The state did not want to initiate a removal because she was old enough to learn to protect herself. I had a client with birth defects because he and his mother were the product of incest. The grandfather raped his much younger sister. The mom was the result. He raped her and my client was the result. He was following the pattern of sexually aggressive behavior and kept being returned from the facility where he was being treated, right back to the family where he was being abused. It was absurd. As a side topic, if you're struggling with drug addiction and think you're still a good parent, you aren't. That's your addiction fooling you. Get your kids into therapy and let them live elsewhere until you get yourself clean. What in the actual duck is the state doing? They're beyond ducked if any of this stuff goes public. This kind of stuff is happening all around you and probably in every state. I assure you. All around you. And not just in the poor families either. There is some shit that goes on in families that everyone just knows are good people that most people cannot even fathom. Not CPS, but we work with them on the regular. I had a kid who was younger than 2 readmitted for large burns. Guess it wasn't enough the first time. Thankfully, the crimes against children people stepped up this time and saw through the parents' bullshit and yanked all the kids out of the house. Turns out the child had wet themselves and so the parents sprayed them with boiling water. Kid was so used to pain they never made a peep the whole time we had them, not even for putting IVs in and cleaning their burn. I didn't work in CPS, but I did work closely with CPS. I worked for a non-profit emergency shelter for children who had been abandoned, neglected or abused. Mind you, I worked at this shelter 10+ years ago, so the details are a bit fuzzy. I get a call one night, worked graveyard, about 2 male sibling group coming in. They had been found and picked up at Motel Drive. The oldest is 11 and the other is 9. I start reading their case file, and there's a long abuse neglect history. After being with us a few days, the 11-year-old is showing increased signs of PTSD, hypervigilance, paranoid, aggressive. He ends up pulling a knife on another one of the kids in the shelter because they came up from behind and grabbed him. Apparently, the mom, who was a heroin user, was prostituting the 11-year-old out to John so she could get money heroin. He would stay awake all night in the motel while she was out of it on heroin to make sure none of the Johns came back to hurt her or his younger brother. By the time the kid turned 12, he had been expelled from 3 different elementary schools and was banned from that particular school district. Eventually, mom lost custody, and the last I heard is they were placed in foster care. Former foster parent here. That reminds me of a girl I had who was pimped out by her mother at age 11 to mother's drug dealer. I asked her what her mother was doing when she was being raped, and she said getting high in the kitchen. This is not CPS but a very similar issue. I did an internship with an organization that helped human trafficking victims. It was seriously horrific. I cannot understand how any human can treat another human in these horrific manners. I will share the worst case without too much detail. A 14-year-old girl from a South American country was rescued in part of a raid on a forced labor rescue operation. The laborer's situation was bad enough, but the girl was held in a trailer and was provided to the workers for sex. The room had a mattress, a nightstand with paper towels, and a teddy bear. When I heard the details, I threw up. I originally wanted a career in human rights. This case broke me. I realized I did not have the emotional capacity required. I felt a lot of guilt after my decision to change track. But I also know I am no good to victims when I was so emotionally disturbed and wrapped up. I still do advocacy from a distance as a private person. I try to help people understand the horrors, and I try to keep my input for possible trafficking situations. But I can't be directly involved like I was. Humanity is truly terrifying. Edit. Fix word. The one that hit me the hardest was before I actually started going out on my own and was shadowing the after hours team. We got a call from a different state worker about a family who had moved to our state and we needed to follow up. The family had 6 kids, and the barely 12-year-old girl in the family was a registered sex offender. At 12, it was heartbreaking. It was a blended family, and the mom, who was the bio parent of the girl, believed that the girl had been exposed to porn and sex by her bio dad. Anyway, one night, one of the kids said, girl's name, touched my penis. The parents, shocked, talked to each kid individually where they all disclosed that she had touched them. Not knowing how to handle it, they called CPS and their state for help. CPS came out, called the cops, and for reasons that weren't clear to me, the child was placed on the registry by a judge. In my experience, usually they try inpatient and other therapies before going that route, but apparently that state and judge did things differently. So, when the family moved to our state, we had to go out to make sure the family was following adequate guidelines. For example, the girl was not allowed to be alone with her siblings. She couldn't swim in the pool at the same time as her siblings. She couldn't go to school or the park or birthday parties, because she was a sex offender. Her siblings couldn't have friends over. She was such a sweet kid. It really was such a sad situation. She told us she wanted to be a fashion designer and her favorite thing to do was play Xbox with her siblings. All the kids were in therapy, and they appeared to harbor no ill will toward her. I think about this case a lot and I always wonder what happened to their family. This type of thing is why I oppose the sex offender registry as it currently works. That girl was probably a victim and instead of getting her help, they ruined her life. Literally, her entire life will be different than it could have been, and not for the better. It makes me terribly sad and angry. Can you imagine this girl desperately scrambling to find a job when she's in her 20s or 30s, but being completely unable to because some ducked up judge decided to place a 12-year-old on the sex offender register? Ducking hell. Bro, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. Thanks for watching, mate. Make sure to smash that like button and subscribe for more high quality content.